The moment I realized my family no longer saw me as a person, I was sitting at their Thanksgiving table holding a bowl of mashed potatoes no one had asked for. Around me, laughter filled the room. Conversations bounced from one side of the table to the other. Not a single person looked my way. When I quietly stood up, put on my coat, and walked out the front door, nobody stopped me. Nobody even noticed. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just leaving Thanksgiving dinner. I was leaving their lives forever. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you loved most, I'd love to hear your story. Please like and subscribe if stories like this speak to your heart. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Sometimes it's comforting to know we're not alone. 5 years before that Thanksgiving dinner, my husband David died on a rainy Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio. Sometimes I still remembered the sound of the hospital monitor going silent. Sometimes I still woke up expecting to hear his footsteps coming down the hallway. After 43 years of marriage, losing him felt like losing half of my own heartbeat. David had always been the center of our family. Not because he demanded attention, because people naturally gathered around him. He was the kind of man who fixed broken bicycles for neighborhood children and spent his Saturdays helping strangers move furniture. When he laughed, everyone laughed. When he hugged you, you felt safe. And when he died, something inside our family changed forever. At first, I thought it was grief. Everyone mourned differently. Jennifer, my daughter, threw herself into work. She lived in a large house outside Cincinnati with her husband Brian and their 2 daughters. Michael, my son, became distant almost overnight. He stopped calling regularly, stopped visiting, stopped asking how I was doing. For a while, I made excuses for them. They're hurting too, I told myself. Give them time. But time didn't heal what was happening. It revealed it. The first Thanksgiving after David passed away felt strange but manageable. The second felt lonely. By the third, I started noticing that family gatherings revolved around everyone except me. Conversations would stop when I approached. Decisions would be made without asking my opinion. Sometimes I felt less like a mother and more like an elderly relative everyone felt obligated to keep around. Still, I refused to give up. Family mattered to me. It always would. Every Thanksgiving morning, I continued the traditions David and I had built together over 4 decades. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, played old jazz records in the kitchen, prepared recipes that had been passed down through generations: sweet potato casserole, cornbread stuffing, green bean casserole, pumpkin pie, and David's favorite mashed potatoes. The recipe card still carried his handwriting. I touched it every year. It made me feel close to him. That Thanksgiving morning began the same way. I woke at 5:30. The house felt quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that reminds you you're living alone. I stood by the kitchen window while coffee brewed and watched snowflakes drift across the backyard. For a moment, I imagined David standing beside me, smiling, teasing me for worrying too much. "Everything's going to be fine, Renee." That was always his favorite sentence. Everything's going to be fine. I wished I still believed it. By noon, my kitchen smelled wonderful. The counters were covered with dishes. I had spent nearly 2 days preparing food for my family. Even though Jennifer had insisted she was hosting, even though nobody had asked me to bring anything, I brought food anyway, because that's what mothers do. We show love through effort, through sacrifice, through little things nobody notices until they're gone. Around 1 o'clock, Jennifer called. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." "Just making sure you're still coming." "Of course." "Okay, we're pretty busy here. See you later." Click. That was it. No asking how I was, no excitement, No warmth, just another item checked off a list. I stared at the phone after the call ended. The silence in my kitchen suddenly felt heavier. Years ago, Jennifer used to call me 3 times while cooking Thanksgiving dinner. She would ask questions, laugh, tell stories. Now I felt like an obligation squeezed between errands. I pushed the thought away. I didn't want negativity ruining the holiday. By 3 o'clock, I loaded everything into my SUV. The pumpkin pies, the casseroles, the containers of homemade cranberry sauce, the serving trays. Enough food to feed 15 people. As I carefully arranged everything, I noticed something strange. I couldn't remember the last time Michael had visited me without needing something. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Every recent visit had involved paperwork, questions about finances, questions about the house, questions about Dad's investments. Never questions about me. Never questions about my health, my happiness, my loneliness. Just business. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment and tried to shake the feeling. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe grief was making me sensitive. Maybe, but deep down, I knew something had changed. The hour-long drive to Jennifer's house gave me plenty of time to think. Christmases, birthdays, family vacations, soccer games, graduations. I had spent my entire adult life putting my children first. David and I worked extra jobs so they could attend good schools. We skipped vacations so they could have opportunities. We sacrificed things they would never even know about, and I would have done it all again, without hesitation, because that's what parents do. The problem was that somewhere along the way, my children stopped seeing those sacrifices. They stopped seeing me. When I finally pulled into Jennifer's driveway, dozens of cars already filled the property. The house glowed with warm holiday lights. Laughter drifted from inside. For a moment, hope returned. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe I was imagining problems that weren't really there. Maybe we'd share memories about David. Maybe we'd laugh together. Maybe we'd feel like a family again. I grabbed the first casserole dish and headed toward the front door. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something odd. Nobody opened the door. Nobody greeted me. Nobody seemed to know I had arrived. Through the window, I could see everyone gathered inside, talking, laughing, celebrating. And somehow, despite being invited, I suddenly felt like a stranger standing outside my own family's life. I forced a smile onto my face and reached for the door handle. At that moment, I had no idea that before the night was over, I would discover a secret that would change everything I believed about my children. And I certainly didn't know that Thanksgiving would become the last day I ever sat at their table. I stood on Jennifer's front porch for several seconds before finally opening the door myself. The sound of laughter immediately poured into the cold November air. For a moment, nobody noticed me. The living room was crowded with relatives, neighbors, and friends. Football played on the television. Children ran through the hallway. Someone was carrying a tray of drinks. The entire house looked warm and welcoming. To everyone except me. I stepped inside carrying a heavy casserole dish. "Hello," I called out. A few people glanced in my direction. Then they returned to their conversations. No hugs, no excitement, no one saying they were glad I had arrived. Just a few polite nods. I forced a smile. Maybe everyone was distracted. Maybe I was overthinking things again. Then Jennifer finally appeared from the kitchen. "Oh, hi, Mom." She kissed my cheek quickly, the kind of kiss that felt more like obligation than affection. "Need help with those?" she asked. Before I could answer, she was already turning away. "We're running behind." Then she disappeared back into the kitchen. I stood alone holding the casserole. For a second, I felt ridiculous, like a delivery driver who had arrived at the wrong address. Eventually, I carried the dish into the kitchen myself. The counters were already crowded with food. I carefully placed my casserole beside several store-bought trays. No one commented on it. No one asked what I had brought. No one thanked me. I looked around. Brian was standing near the refrigerator talking to Michael. The moment they noticed me looking in their direction, both men became quiet. Too quiet. A strange silence passed between them. Then Michael forced a smile. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. Happy Thanksgiving." "You too." That was the entire conversation. A few seconds later, he was talking to Brian again. Only now they were speaking in lower voices. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation of hundreds of small moments, little reminders that I no longer belonged in the center of their lives. I drifted toward the living room. Ashley was scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, Ashley. Love your sweater." "Thank you." She immediately returned to her screen. Conversation over. Only Emma seemed genuinely happy to see me. My youngest granddaughter jumped up from the couch and wrapped her arms around me. "Grandma Renee." Her smile instantly warmed my heart. "There's my favorite girl." "You always say that." "Because it's true." She laughed. For a few minutes, we talked about school and her art classes. It was the first genuine conversation I'd had all afternoon. Then Jennifer called Emma into the kitchen, and once again, I was alone. As more guests arrived, the house grew louder. People gathered into groups. Stories were shared. Drinks were poured. I wandered between rooms searching for somewhere I fit. Somewhere I mattered. Somewhere I wasn't simply taking up space. Eventually, dinner was announced. Everyone moved toward the dining room. I followed behind. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then I looked at the table, and my heart sank. The dining table had been expanded to fit 12 people. Every chair was occupied. Every place setting carefully arranged. Except something was missing. My seat. For nearly 20 years, I had sat in the same spot during Thanksgiving. The chair beside David. After he passed away, Jennifer had continued placing me there. It had become a tradition, a symbol, a reminder. But this year, that seat belonged to someone else. One of Brian's business associates sat there laughing with another guest. I stood frozen for a moment. Maybe there was another chair. Maybe they had rearranged things. Then Jennifer noticed me. "Oh, Mom!" She pointed toward a small folding table near the kitchen doorway. "We set up extra seating over there." "Over there." The words hit harder than they should have. At the small table sat 2 children and an elderly neighbor. It wasn't even in the dining room. It was practically in the kitchen, close enough to hear the family, far enough away not to be part of them. I stared at the chair, then back at Jennifer. For a brief second, I thought she might realize how hurtful this was. She didn't. She simply smiled and returned to arranging plates. I sat down quietly. Nobody protested. Nobody offered me a seat at the main table. Nobody even seemed to notice. From my position, I could see everyone laughing together. Michael sat near Jennifer. Brian was telling a story. The guests listened attentively. Meanwhile, I ate dinner with people who barely knew me. The humiliation settled deep inside my chest. Not because of the chair itself, because of what it represented. I had spent decades building this family, decades creating traditions, decades making holidays magical for everyone else. And now there wasn't even room for me at the table. Halfway through dinner, I decided I needed a glass of water. I stood and walked toward the kitchen. As I approached the hallway, I heard voices coming from Brian's home office. The door wasn't completely closed. I recognized Michael's voice immediately. "Once we sell the house, everything gets easier." I froze. "Sell the house," Brian answered. "I know." but timing matters. We've already waited long enough. Michael sounded irritated. Mom doesn't need that much space anyway. My pulse quickened. They were talking about a house. But whose house? Jennifer suddenly appeared around the corner. The office door immediately closed. The conversation stopped. Brian and Michael emerged seconds later, acting completely normal. Too normal. Brian smiled. Everything okay, Renee? Renee, not Mom, not even Mrs. Matthews. Just Renee. Like I was some distant acquaintance. Yes, I said quietly. Michael avoided eye contact. The knot in my stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I knew it. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I found myself watching everyone more carefully, listening more carefully, looking for clues. Every time I approached a conversation, it seemed to change direction. Every time I entered a room, certain topics disappeared. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then it happened again, and again, and again. By the time dessert was being prepared, I felt less like a family member and more like an outsider accidentally attending a private gathering. Then I noticed something else. Michael and Brian kept exchanging glances. Concerned glances. The kind people share when they're managing a secret. A dangerous secret. I looked toward the dining room where family photographs lined the wall. One picture showed David standing beside me 20 years earlier, both of us smiling, both of us proud. Back then, this family felt unbreakable. Now, I wasn't so sure. As everyone laughed around me, a terrible thought entered my mind. What if this wasn't about grief anymore? What if this wasn't about growing apart? What if they were hiding something from me, something important, something involving a house? And for the first time all evening, I began to wonder whether David had seen this coming long before I did. By the time dessert was brought out, I felt emotionally exhausted. Not because Thanksgiving dinner had been difficult, because I had spent the entire evening pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending I hadn't noticed the missing seat, pretending I hadn't heard Michael and Brian discussing a house, pretending I didn't feel invisible. For years, I had been the one holding everyone together, the peacemaker, the organizer, the mother who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every important date. Now, I sat quietly near the kitchen while everyone else enjoyed the holiday I had spent decades helping create. Jennifer placed pumpkin pie slices around the table. Guests complimented the food. Several people praised the mashed potatoes. My mashed potatoes. The recipe David loved. The recipe I had spent an hour preparing that morning. No one mentioned that I had made them. No one even looked in my direction. I lowered my eyes and concentrated on my coffee. The pain felt embarrassingly childish. I was 68 years old. Why did I still crave my children's approval? Why did I still hope they would notice me? Maybe because mothers never stop being mothers, no matter how old their children become. Across the room, Ashley was speaking with several cousins. Emma sat beside her, scrolling through photos on her phone. For a moment, I watched them and remembered Jennifer at their age. She used to sit beside me during family gatherings. She used to tell me everything, her dreams, her fears, the boys she liked, the colleges she wanted to attend. Back then, I couldn't imagine a future where my daughter would look through me as if I were a stranger. Yet somehow, that future had arrived. A burst of laughter interrupted my thoughts. Brian was telling another story. Everyone seemed captivated. Even Michael was laughing. I noticed something else. Every time conversation drifted toward family history, or David, someone changed the subject. Almost deliberately, as if they wanted to avoid discussing the past, or perhaps avoid discussing something connected to it. The uneasiness in my stomach continued growing. Then something happened that changed everything. Ashley looked up from her phone. completely unaware of the tension around her, completely innocent, and asked a simple question. Grandma doesn't know about the assisted living place yet. The room froze. Every sound disappeared. Forks stopped moving. Conversations ended instantly. Even the football game playing on television suddenly seemed distant. I felt my heartbeat thundering inside my chest. Ashley looked around in confusion. What? Jennifer's face turned pale. Michael nearly dropped his coffee cup. Brian stared at the table. No one spoke. No one moved. I looked directly at Jennifer. What assisted living place? My voice sounded calm. Too calm. Jennifer swallowed. Ashley immediately realized she had said something wrong. Her eyes widened. Oh no. Jennifer, I repeated. What assisted living place? My daughter forced a nervous laugh. Mom, it's nothing. Nothing. That word, the favorite word of people hiding something. I set my coffee cup down carefully. Then explain it. Jennifer glanced toward Michael. Michael glanced toward Brian. The exchange lasted less than a second, but it told me everything. They had rehearsed this, maybe not the exact conversation, but the secret itself. Finally, Jennifer spoke. We were just discussing options for the future. What future? Your future. I stared at her. My future. Mom, you're getting older. There it was. The sentence every aging parent eventually fears. You're getting older. Not, how are you feeling? Do you need anything? Are you happy? Just a reminder that your age has become someone else's concern. I folded my hands in my lap. And what exactly have you been discussing? Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Michael stepped in. We've just been worried about you. Worried? Another interesting word. What specifically are you worried about? No answer came immediately. Finally, Michael said, You live alone. I've lived alone for 5 years. You're not getting any younger. The room remained silent. Every guest pretending not to listen. Every guest listening. I looked from Michael to Jennifer, then back again. Have either of you asked me whether I want to move into assisted living? Neither answered, because they already knew the answer. No, I said quietly. No, you haven't. Jennifer sighed. Mom, we were only exploring possibilities. Without telling me, we didn't want to upset you. The irony nearly made me laugh. The secret itself wasn't upsetting. The betrayal was. Before I could respond, Emma suddenly spoke. Grandma doesn't need assisted living. Jennifer shot her daughter a warning look. Emma. No, she doesn't? That's enough. Emma fell silent, but I noticed something important. The fear in Jennifer's expression. Not concern. Fear. As though she desperately wanted this conversation to end. The knot in my stomach tightened even further. Then another detail caught my attention. On the buffet counter behind Brian sat a folder. A simple blue folder, partially open. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but I did. Because I could see a signature page sticking out. And something about it looked familiar. Very familiar. The handwriting, my handwriting, at least it appeared to be. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the counter. Immediately, Brian stood. Need something, Renee? Again, not Mom, not Mrs. Matthews. Renee. I pointed toward the folder. What's that? His reaction came too quickly, too defensive. Nothing important. He reached for the folder, but not before I caught a glimpse. A signature. My signature. At least that's what it looked like. I stopped breathing for a moment, because I knew something everyone else in that room didn't know. I had not signed a single legal document in months, not one. Yet there was my name, written in blue ink, attached to paperwork nobody wanted me to see. Brian quickly closed the folder. The movement was subtle, but it was enough. Enough to confirm my growing suspicion. Something was happening behind my back. Something involving paperwork. something involving property, and perhaps something involving that mysterious conversation about selling a house. I returned to my chair, my pulse racing. The room gradually resumed its conversations. People began pretending everything was normal again. But nothing felt normal anymore. I watched Jennifer laugh at something a guest said. I watched Michael avoid looking at me. I watched Brian keep the folder within arm's reach. And for the first time that evening, a frightening possibility entered my mind. What if this wasn't simply about putting me into assisted living? What if the assisted living discussion was only part of a much larger Plan A plan involving my finances, my property, my future? The more I thought about it, the more pieces began fitting together. The strange conversations, the missing seat, the secrecy, the talk about selling a house, the unexplained paperwork, the signature, my signature, or at least a version of it. Suddenly, I wasn't hurt anymore. I was alarmed, deeply alarmed. Because if someone had forged my name once, what else had they done? And who exactly was behind it? Michael, Brian, Jennifer, or all three? As dessert plates were cleared away and laughter filled the room once more, I realized something important. I was no longer sitting among family. I was sitting among people who were hiding something from me. Something big, something dangerous. And before this night ended, I intended to find out exactly what it was. I didn't confront anyone that night, not because I wasn't angry, not because I wasn't hurt, and certainly not because I was afraid. I stayed silent because something David used to tell me echoed in my mind. When people think you don't know the truth, Renee, they reveal much more than they intend to. For 43 years, my husband had been an excellent judge of character. At that moment, I decided to follow his advice. I smiled when people looked at me. I nodded during conversations. I accepted a second slice of pie I didn't want. And all the while, I watched. Listened. Waited. The blue folder never left Brian's side. That fact alone told me everything. Whatever was inside mattered. A lot. Around 9 o'clock, guests started preparing to leave. Coats appeared. Children grew sleepy. Goodbyes filled the house. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes after something inside you breaks. Jennifer was standing near the front door, thanking guests for coming. Michael was helping carry leftovers into the kitchen. Brian was speaking with a neighbor. No one seemed concerned about me. No one seemed interested in how I was feeling after the assisted living discussion. It was as if the entire conversation had never happened. As if my future had been discussed over dessert the same way someone might discuss football scores. I stood quietly in the hallway and looked at the family photographs hanging on the wall. There was one from Jennifer's wedding, another from Michael's college graduation, a Christmas portrait taken years ago. And then there was my favorite, a photograph of David holding Emma when she was a baby. His smile was enormous, his eyes full of love. I reached out and touched the frame. God, I missed him. More than anyone knew. More than I usually allowed myself to admit. Because David would have noticed. If I had been pushed to a folding table, he would have noticed. If our children had ignored me, he would have noticed. If someone had been planning something behind my back, he would have noticed. And suddenly, I felt very alone. Not just because my husband was gone, because I realized I had spent years pretending things were fine. Pretending the distance growing between me and my children wasn't real. Pretending every ignored phone call, every forgotten visit, every cold interaction didn't matter. Tonight had stripped away those illusions. The truth stood naked in front of me. I was no longer a priority in my children's lives. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. I glanced toward the kitchen. Jennifer was laughing with Brian. Michael was checking something on his phone. None of them looked my way, not once. I quietly walked to the coat rack, removed my winter coat, put it on. No one noticed. I picked up my purse. Still, no one noticed. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the room, waiting. Not because I wanted attention, because some small part of me hoped one of my children would look up. Maybe Jennifer would say, "Mom, are you leaving already?" Maybe Michael would ask, "Are you okay?" Maybe someone would walk me to my car. Maybe someone would hug me. Maybe. But nobody did. The room remained full of voices, full of laughter, full of people. And yet, I had never felt more invisible. I opened the front door. Cold air rushed inside. Still, nobody looked up. I stepped outside. The door closed softly behind me. And that was it. No farewell, no goodbye, no one calling my name. Just silence. I stood on the porch for several seconds, staring at the dark driveway. Then I began walking toward my SUV. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because I was leaving Thanksgiving, because I was leaving behind years of denial. The denial that my family still valued me the way I valued them. When I reached the vehicle, I placed my hand on the door handle. Then I turned around. The house glowed warmly against the darkness. From outside, it looked beautiful, a perfect family Thanksgiving. Anyone driving past would have seen happiness, tradition, togetherness. They would never have guessed what had happened inside. They would never have guessed a mother had spent the evening feeling unwanted in a family she helped build. A tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away immediately. I wasn't crying because I felt sorry for myself. I was grieving the family I thought I had, grieving the relationships I had spent decades protecting, grieving the realization that love isn't always returned equally. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away. Not one person came outside. Not one. The further I drove, the lighter I felt. Not happier, just clearer. The fog that had clouded my judgment for years was finally lifting. By the time I reached the interstate, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to go home. Home suddenly felt different. The conversations I'd overheard echoed through my mind. Once we sell the house, Grandma doesn't know about the assisted living place yet, the mysterious paperwork, the suspicious signature. None of it made sense. Yet, but I intended to find out. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. For a brief second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe Jennifer had noticed I was gone. Maybe she was worried. Maybe she wanted to apologize. The notification wasn't from Jennifer. It wasn't from Michael either. It was a promotional email. I laughed bitterly. Then another 20 minutes passed. No calls, no texts, nothing. Apparently, they still hadn't noticed. The realization hurt more than I expected. I had been gone nearly half an hour. Not one person had checked on me. Not one. Then I remembered something. Several months earlier, attorney Robert Hayes had called me. David's longtime attorney. The man who had handled nearly every important legal matter in our lives. At the time, Robert had said something unusual. "If you ever need me, Renee, call anytime, day or night." I hadn't thought much about it then. Now those words returned to me. Day or night. A strange instinct settled over me. Instead of taking the highway toward home, I exited onto another road. One leading toward downtown Columbus. Toward Robert's office. The farther I drove, the stronger the feeling became. David had always trusted Robert, completely. If something suspicious was happening, Robert would know where to start. By the time I reached the city, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Most office buildings were dark. The streets were quiet. I parked outside a small brick building and sat in my vehicle for a moment. Part of me felt foolish. Another part felt absolutely certain. I took a deep breath. Then I grabbed my purse and stepped out into the cold night. What I didn't know was that before the night ended, Robert Hayes would hand me something David had left behind years earlier. Something that would change everything. Something my husband had prepared long before he died. And once I opened it, there would be no going back. The lights were still on inside Robert Hayes's office. That surprised me. It was Thanksgiving night, nearly 10 o'clock. Most people were home with family. But Robert had never been like most people. For over 30 years, he had been more than our attorney. He had been one of David's closest friends. The two men played golf together, argued about football, shared countless dinners with our family. If there was anyone David trusted completely, it was Robert. I walked through the front entrance feeling uncertain. The receptionist's desk was empty. A lamp glowed softly in the hallway. Before I could knock on Robert's office door, it opened. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. More gray hair, more lines around his eyes, but the concern on his face was immediate. "Renee." His expression changed instantly. What happened? That question alone nearly made me cry. Not because it was dramatic, because it was the first time all day someone had looked at me and genuinely cared. I forced a smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Robert." He studied my face, then stepped aside. "Come in." I followed him into the office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. It felt strangely comforting, like stepping into the past. Robert closed the door behind us. "Tell me what's going on." For several moments, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I didn't know where to begin. Finally, I told him everything. The missing seat, the conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the assisted living discussion, the folder, the signature, the talk about selling a house. Robert listened without interrupting. His expression grew more serious with every detail. When I finished, silence filled the room. Then he slowly leaned back in his chair. I was afraid of this. A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" Robert looked toward a locked filing cabinet in the corner. For the first time that night, I saw genuine sadness in his eyes. David prepared for this possibility. I stared at him. "What possibility?" "That one day your children might see you as a source of assets instead of a mother." The words hit like a punch. I immediately wanted to reject them, to defend Jennifer, to defend Michael. But the events of the evening made that impossible. Robert stood, walked toward the filing cabinet, unlocked a drawer, then removed a thick manila envelope. My heart skipped. Across the front, written in David's familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. "For Renee, only if necessary." I stopped breathing. For a moment, it felt as if my husband had reached across time and touched my shoulder. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the slight slant, the careful lettering, the same handwriting on recipe cards and birthday notes, the same handwriting I had loved for decades. My fingers trembled as Robert placed the envelope in front of me. He left this with me 3 years before he died. I couldn't take my eyes off it. "What is it?" Robert sat down again. "A contingency plan." "A what?" "He instructed me not to give it to you unless certain circumstances occurred." I looked up. "What circumstances?" Robert hesitated, then answered quietly. "If your children ever attempted to manipulate you, isolate you, or pressure you regarding family assets." My chest tightened. David had actually anticipated this years before his death. The idea seemed impossible, yet somehow not impossible enough. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, several legal documents, and a flash drive. The letter sat on top. I unfolded the pages. The moment I saw the first line, tears filled my eyes. My dearest Renee, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped would never happen. I had to stop reading for a moment. David's voice seemed alive inside every word. Robert quietly turned away, giving me privacy. I continued. You know better than anyone how much I love our children. Everything I did in life was for you and for them. But love should never blind us to reality. Over the last several years, I've noticed changes